On this episode of the Empower podcast...
I didn't know what to say because I could feel like his boner against me. And people have seen it. They know it's wrong and they know it's not okay. In my head, I've made up a million excuses.
Women supporting other women.
We are listening and we have your back.
Hello and welcome back to the Empower podcast. I'm your host, Robbi Stevens. Thank you so much for joining us on this exciting journey together, sharing and empowering the many incredibly brave people whose stories have inspired the plots and characters in our films. Today, I want to welcome Abbie.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
Just a little bit of context. Abbie is on today as part of the Nightingale film podcast, as she, like Grace, the protagonist in the film, experienced sexual harassment. Today's episode comes with a trigger warning, so if you're sensitive to this subject, just consider if now is the right time for you to listen. But our intention, as always, is to make our podcasts helpful, to make them healing, and for people to feel seen and heard. We are also passionately committed to shaking up the normalization and acceptance of rape and sexual assault in our communities today. Aja, let's jump right in.
I think for me, sexual harassment started from about school and just like inappropriate touching, people feeling it's okay to not ask me whether it's okay to like touch me and say like, yo, you have a big bum, or can I feel like what that, just things like that where they think it's quite funny, but to me it's, I feel quite uncomfortable. But you see no one else complaining and you don't see anyone else saying anything, so you just have to get used to it. But looking back, I'm like, no, that wasn't okay. Experiences growing up sort of as men saying like, trust me, you do want to have sex with me, and like sort of pushing me to do things I don't want to do, and trying to convince me I want something that I don't, essentially.
So it's constant, it's kind of happening on a regular, would you say?
Yeah, it's become so regular you start to think, is this normal? And like people are allowed to just do what they want because no one else says anything. And I feel like this is now the time for us to start saying like, no, it's not okay for anyone to touch you in any way without you saying yes.
For sure.
Yeah. I used to work in retail, and it used to happen with customers, or sort of like with your managers in the stockroom thinking it's okay to just like touch you and out. And like when I think back at it, I'm like, the reason they were doing it in like stock rooms and where people can't see is because they know it's wrong and they know it's not okay. But you're at work and they're your manager and they have that sense of power, so it's just like, oh, I'll just get on with it because I need the money, right?
Yeah. Right. And so what is your biggest memory of being sexually assaulted?
I think the one that stuck with me the most is I was in secondary school and my family had just moved like out of the borough, and we moved somewhere else, which required me to take a train, so I wasn't walking to school rather anymore. I had to take a train home, and at that time we finished school at 3:30 and it's quite packed, and on the train and in my school uniform, and there's this man that just like presses up against me, so I'm standing in front of him and he's standing behind me, and he just starts like pressing up against me. And at the time I didn't know what to say because I could feel like every inch of my body was like, oh, this is wrong. But it's a packed train, you think, right? So he's probably not doing it on purpose. So I started making up these excuses in my head. So I moved forward to like get away from him, and then he follows me, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is getting weird. And you can just feel like his boner against me, and I'm like 14, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And you're looking around and no one's saying anything. Everyone can see what's going on, but no one says anything, so I don't say anything. And at the time, in my head, I've made up a million excuses of saying the train was packed, he probably didn't know what was going on, and just whatever. Like I didn't need to make a big deal of it, but the reason I think that stuck with me is because every time I think of it, I'm like, oh, I should have said something. Like I should have like called him out and embarrassed him in front of everyone else.
But we freeze, don't we?
Yeah.
We don't have the words to. What would you say now to, a younger female who's going through the same thing? What would be the words that you would say to them? I
would say speak up, and that's probably the hardest thing to do, because first of all, when you do that, you'd want to know, or rather, even before you do that, you want to know if you're going to be supported. But I promise you, more people are more likely to support you than they are the person that's assaulting you. I think speak up, especially in that moment right then, and embarrass them, because I think people, and I'm not even just going to say men, because it's not only men that sexually harass women, but I mean, in my case it was. And that man, if I had said something on a train with full of people, he would have been embarrassed, and me in a school uniform, I would have been the one that everyone would have stuck up for immediately.
What would you say?
I'd say, get away from me, keep touching me, move back. I've moved forwards and you followed me, like, move back. And people have seen it. Like, don't ever think that no one else sees it, especially when it happens in a public place. I think people are just so used to being a bystander, especially in London, that it's just like, if she's not saying anything, why should I say anything, right?
Yeah.
But then I also say to those people that are bystanders, please speak up for the person as well.
Yeah.
Like, say something, because I'm quite a direct person, right? I'm always going to stick up for myself. I don't really care the situation or what people think of me. But I'm a 14-year-old girl, and this is grown man pressing up against me, and no one else is saying anything. I'm not saying anything because no one else is saying anything, right? Yeah. So if you see that, well, no matter the age or whatever, you just don't know the person. You don't know how they are. You don't know what they're scared of. Speak up for them so they see that there's someone there for them, stepping up for them.
Claim the space, step forward,
yeah.
So moving on, bouncing off that is women supporting other women.
Yeah.
What do you think that looks like? Can you unpack that a little bit?
I think there's two different instances. So there's like the public instance, right, where you speak up for someone, and then for the most part, I think giving trust to human beings, like, they will be on the side of the victim, right, and they'll say that's wrong. Me and my friend went out with her and her colleagues, and she just said randomly, oh, this director just sent me a picture of his penis, and her director, right, and we're all just looking like, what the fuck? She's started the job a week in. She's like, oh, I'm not going to say anything, it's fine, whatever. I'm like, if you don't say anything, this is going to continue. And it's like, you can't push someone to do something they don't want to do, but you can be there and be like, whatever you decide to do, I've got your back. Yeah. And my friend who works with her was like, do you know what? You don't have to say anything. Just give me the permission to complain on it. Because I've been here long enough. I understand you fear you're going to lose your job, which is so fucked up, right? Like, you think, if I speak up, I'm going to be the one in trouble rather than the person who actually did something wrong. So just sort of being there and saying to her, you know what, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. We've all seen it. The evidence is right there. We'll do it for you. We'll speak up for you. And then when it's time for you to say your version of what happened, we're going to be there to back you 100%.
That's so good. 100%.
Whatever happens, no matter how much he tries to twist it. He can say 100 things right now and threaten you, even when we're not there. And you've gone back to work and he's there and he says something to you, just know that whenever this continues, we've got your back. So I think that's number one. And
did that happen?
Yeah, my friend reported it for her.
That's amazing.
It was dealt with. I don't know if he's got fired because that's a whole nother conversation, right? But yeah. And then another one is my sister, she told me this when I was telling her I was coming on this podcast. She was like, she was in an Uber and on her way home from like going out with her friends or whatever, and she could just see the driver, like your situation, looking at her through the rearview mirror and touching himself. And she's like, he just needs to get me home. I can't say anything. If I say anything, I'm literally so scared and terrified for her, because she's right. If she does say speak up, there are instances where you can't say anything. You just have to go with it and until you get to somewhere safe, because she's
safety first.
She's in his car, right? And I'm like, okay, as soon as you got home, you should have told me, and we would have reported him straight away. And she's just like, now he knows where I live, he dropped me off at home, and there's all these things. But this is why I say support again is needed, because now that she knew that I would have supported her if that happened, and I would have reported him, and it doesn't matter if he knows where he lives. We've got you, like, we've got your back. The police are now involved. Like, you have to understand these people that assault you, and they're more scared about what's gonna happen to them than they are of coming back and seeking revenge. Like, that's the last thing on their minds.
So the more we fight and stand up and support people to report this and to fight it, the better off we are.
Yeah, 100% right. Men that assault women, and they already know that, okay, I might have to go through this for a couple of months, but at the end of the day, I'll be fine, because how many cases really gets prosecuted? How many reports really get, so they do know the system has their back 100%.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that moves on to our next section, education and the system. On the Nightingale, we interviewed all the cast members, and we said, what do you think would help with this massive problem that's just in the fabric of our communities now? And everyone said education. The system is so not supportive of this problem. Like, all you have to do is look at examples like Benjamin Mendy, the footballer.
I think, unfortunately, the system and education comes hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do one without the other. You can be as educated as you want to be, and if you still know that at the end of the day, whatever, if this happens to me and they're going to get away with it, it's like, what's the point of the education then? What's the point of knowing all this? What's the point of having their back, right? So I think, first and foremost, I think in schools, from young, kids should be taught about consent. They should be taught this is not okay. Even looking at me in a weird and touching, that's not okay. Yeah, you're not touching me, but like, that is mental abuse. Like, I'm looking at it, and it's doing something to me. So I think it needs to be taught in all, and it needs to be a core subject as maths and English and whatever it is, because at the end of the day, you have to come out after school and live life, right?
Without, and be healthy.
Right. And you need to know what's right and what's wrong.
Otherwise you can't learn anyway.
Exactly. You can't be thinking in my head when things happen to me, should I say something? Is this right? Is this wrong? Like, I should automatically know the answer. I shouldn't have to be sitting there thinking, well, no one else has said anything, so I'm not going to say anything. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the system, I mean, like, even with his case where now he's proven innocent, people just automatically assume he hasn't done it. No, he's innocent because there isn't enough evidence to prove that he was in the wrong. Yeah. So it's not necessarily he didn't do it.
He was cleared in January of raping 4 women and sexually assaulting another, wasn't he? And more. There was more stories as well.
And it's like, how can every single woman be lying? Really? Like, women that don't know each other just come together to just do this one big lie? Like, it just doesn't sound realistic to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the system has a big part to play. I think our government has a big part to play in saying this is not okay and we're going to put you guys first, and if you say this is what's happened, we're going to investigate. They need to know that whenever they decide to come forward, you have their back.
It's their time, and you should have their back.
Yeah.
And you should go to court soon.
Exactly. Because when a serial killer, you find out a serial killer's been killing people for years and you catch them 5 years later, you still make sure you find out, right? You figure out what happened, you go back. So I think the same should happen for everyone else. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Very good point. So just moving on to hope, because we need to be inspired to move forward. How do you find hope, Ad? What do you feel is your inspiration to keep on going?
Family, friends.
Okay.
Having each other's back, I think. And I think right now, like you're saying, there is something happening. People are speaking up more, and like even this film is a way of speaking up, and there's different ways of doing it. It's not just always just going to report it. Making this film is just as important because so many people are going to watch this and be like, that happened to me. So that's my hope right now, is just people are finding different ways of saying this is not okay. And eventually the higher ups are going to open their eyes and say, okay, we can't keep ignoring this forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my hope.
Definitely. I just want to talk about someone who gives me hope, because we have so many amazing people fighting for reform. But I just want to mention someone called Laura Bates, who is the founder of the Everyday Sexism Project. She writes regularly for The Guardian, The Telegraph, The New York Times, amongst others, and she's won a British Press Award for journalism in 2015. She works closely with politicians and businesses and schools. She goes into schools like on a weekly, like 3 times a week, police forces, organisations, and she's written many books, but one in particular I want to mention today because of what we've been talking about, and it's called Fix the System, Not the Women. You know, and this book goes into education, politics, media, policing, the criminal justice. It covers so much, and I just think
that's education as well.
Yeah,
learning about that.
Yeah. And I think if we can equip ourselves with that knowledge, if we can educate ourselves and really be able to speak on behalf of this problem, then it will create change as well. And I've just got to mention what Jo Brand said about the book. She said, get your daughters to read this, but only after your partners and sons have finished it. I think a lot of guys ask, how do we help?
Yeah. And I think we also need to talk to them as well. It's not just talking amongst ourselves. I think we need to involve them in the conversation as well. They need to see things from our perspective, but how they can change it from their perspective as well, and how it looks from them. We actually need to hear how it seems like to them, how we're being treated as well. So yeah.
Men that I respect have started stopping conversations in back rooms and just not allowing, certain words to be used. It starts at a very basic level. There's, you can't, nothing is too small to start with, is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Aj, for coming on to this podcast. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
I really enjoyed that. I can't wait to see the film. And I encourage more women and girls to just speak up and tell their story, tell their side of the story. We are listening and we have your back. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aj. Thank you everyone for listening, and if you do need someone to talk to, please check out our link tree on Instagram over at empower.cic, where there's a list of links to places you can find support. Thank you.